Welcome to the tale of a dusty frontier town on the brink, where outlaws strut in expecting easy pickings, only to collide with a quiet bartender who holds secrets more potent than gunpowder. When the ruthless Rourke and his gang march into Mesquite Crossing, they think they'll humiliate the humble folk and ride off in triumph. Yet they've gravely underestimated Morgan Gray, the unassuming man behind the bar. He's cleaned more glasses than any soul this side of the desert, and possibly faced more gunfighters than you can count. If you love surprising twists, larger-than-life showdowns, and subtle heroes who rise when pushed to the limit, then you won't want to miss a second of this story. Listen to the whole adventure and see how courage, loyalty, and a determination for peace can outdraw any evil. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these gripping narratives rolling. In the windblown settlement of Mesquite Crossing, folks generally understood that caution was the wisest policy. Dust storms came in on a whim, the single railroad siding brought travelers of every stripe, and nights were dark enough that coyotes sometimes slunk right through the center of town without being noticed. Few places exhibited that blend of quiet wariness more than the Golden Spur Saloon, the only establishment still open past midnight on most days. And there, behind a time-worn wooden counter, worked Morgan Gray, a man seemingly content to polish shot glasses in silence, nodding to customers with a politeness that bordered on invisibility. Over the last 5 years, Morgan had methodically become part of the background, his unassuming eyes, the slight incline of his head when answering a question, and his measured tone all spoke of a life lived in near-constant awareness. Most people in Mesquite Crossing did not press him about his past. They simply accepted that Morgan Gray served drinks with a competent efficiency, never spilling a drop, never shorting anyone's measure, and then drifted away as soon as the saloon closed its doors. In her position behind the cash box sat Harriet Cole, who jointly owned the Golden Spur with Morgan. Harriet could read a man's mood as well as any gambler could read a crooked deck of cards. She marveled at Morgan's ability to quell arguments with a single well-chosen word, or prevent a fight by rearranging which customers sat next to each other. Harriet suspected that Morgan possessed some rare knowledge of human nature that let him sense trouble before it happened. More than once, she wondered if his reserved nature hid experiences too costly to share. Late in the day, right when the sunset threw dramatic streaks of purple and orange across the sky, Sheriff Abel Dunbar stepped into the saloon. The bat-wing doors gave their usual groan, but there was something in the lawman's posture that prompted Harriet to set down her ledger. Dunbar's face was lined from years of desert wind, and on this particular afternoon, fatigue pulled around his eyes. He pulled out a stool. "Afternoon, Harriet." "Morgan," he said, voice grave. "Word out of Maple Bluff is that Rourke's gang, mean lot if the rumors hold, has drifted down south. They've cleaned out 3 banks in 2 months. Morgan paused in his glass, polishing for a split second. Though his mannerisms barely shifted, Harriet had been around him long enough to notice the subtle tension that gathered in his shoulders. "We a likely target, Abel?" Harriet asked. She'd already begun calculating the night's probable earnings and how best to secure them. The sheriff exhaled. "Hard to say, Harriet, but it never hurts to be careful. My deputy and I can do rounds, but Mesquite Crossing is a soft spot. Ain't no big money here, but if outlaws are feeling cornered, they sometimes pick smaller targets." His gaze shifted to Morgan, who resumed wiping the same glass with methodical care. "Heard the gang includes Red Rourke himself, plus 4 of his men. Lansing, the Wilkes twins, and a younger fella named Robbie Quinn. They're rumored not just to rob places, but to humiliate folks beforehand. They leave corpses as warnings. They prefer fear to stealth." Morgan finished with one glass and reached for another. "We're not exactly brimming with valuables," he said softly, voice so subdued that Dunbar leaned closer to hear. "They might pass us by." Harriet saw the flicker in Morgan's eyes. That faint gleam often meant his instincts. Those uncanny ones were cautioning him. "No harm in being prepared, though," she said. "I'll keep an eye out here. Morgan, maybe we can do a quick count on the storehouse and make sure everything's locked up." Dunbar nodded. "I'd appreciate that. Meanwhile, I'll spread the word. Folks might want to get behind locked doors a little earlier tonight." The conversation lulled. The usual saloon chatter carried on, though the crowd was sparse. An old-timer named Archie Lawson dozing in the corner, Dr. Faraday flipping through a dated medical journal at a table by the side window, and Lucy Delgado, the saloon singer, sipping gingerly on warm tea to prepare her voice for the evening. Lucy's presence often brought a flicker of sophistication to the otherwise dusty environment. She was in the midst of a gentle vocal run when Dunbar tipped his hat and departed, presumably off to warn the rest of the town. As dusk thickened the shadows along Mesquite Crossing's single main street, Harriet busied herself by counting the day's coins. She lifted her gaze every so often to watch Morgan move with that familiar economy of motion. He was stowing bottles below the bar, lining them up to his own exacting system, whiskey near the front, gin and brandy behind. He always kept his right side free, Harriet noted again. It was a small detail that would pass unnoticed by most. If pressed, Harriet might admit she never once saw Morgan's right hand overly occupied, even during the busiest nights. "Harriet," Lucy called softly, setting aside her teacup, "I'm going to run up to my room for a bit and freshen up before the crowd comes in." Harriet nodded, momentarily glancing at Morgan to see if he had any response, but the bartender simply offered Lucy a brief, polite tilt of his head. In the quiet lull, Dr. Faraday stood from his table, stretched, and made his way to the bar. "Morgan," the doctor said in a measured tone, "if that headache medicine I special ordered has arrived on the stage from Bridgewood, I'd appreciate hearing it." It was an odd little dance the two men did. Everyone in the Golden Spur had heard the doctor mention these so-called headaches a dozen times, though Morgan never once showed any sign of suffering from them. Harriet had long suspected this was Dr. Faraday's roundabout method of checking on Morgan's well-being. Morgan's response was the usual. "I'll be sure to let you know, Doc," he said, eyes glancing toward the glass in his hand. "Thank you." Dr. Faraday gave a curt nod, then cast a discerning look at the bartender's posture. "If you have any trouble with that old wound, do come by. No charge, you know." Harriet's eyes flicked between them. She had no clue about the nature of Morgan's old wound. He'd worked for her for 5 years, and not once had he so much as rolled up his sleeves high enough to reveal any scars. But that momentary flicker in Morgan's expression told her there was more beneath the surface. "I'll keep that in mind, Doc," Morgan replied so evenly that one might think they were discussing the weather. Outside, a clatter of hooves and a hollered voice drifted through the open saloon doors. Harriet narrowed her eyes, moving around the bar for a clearer view. 2 riders, each coated in dust from a hard gallop, reined up abruptly in front of the Golden Spur. They looked spooked. The older of the 2 men swung off his horse and nearly tripped on the step as he came in. Sheriff Dunbar," the man gasped, scanning the saloon. "We need the sheriff now." Harriet pointed him back toward the door. "He was here earlier but left to patrol the streets. You might check the station." The man's eyes widened. "The station's empty. We just came from Maple Bluff. There's been a massacre. Rourke's bunch. They shot up the entire place. The sheriff there, gone. It's like they have no mercy." Morgan's arm froze briefly in the act of setting down a bottle. "How far away?" "Couple hours at most," the traveler croaked, hat still dangling from his hand. "They're riding this way. Heard them say so. We barely got out, and we rode fast." A hush fell, broken only by Archie Lawson's hoarse cough. Dr. Faraday stepped forward, always the physician first. "Easy now," he murmured, guiding the traveler and his companion to chairs. "Get your breath. Did you see how many were with Rourke?" "5, the younger rider answered. "Rourke, Lansing, the Wilkes twins, and that kid Robbie Quinn. They butcher folks if they so much as blink wrong. Maple Bluff was full of terror. We had no reason to stay behind. We just ran." Harriet glanced at Morgan, who resumed putting away the bottles but with a purposeful calm that hinted at strong emotions beneath. She recalled how rarely Morgan ever displayed fear. Sometimes she imagined he didn't feel fear the way others did. Now, though, there was a grim line to his jaw. Not long after the exhausted travelers stumbled in, Lucy Delgado came downstairs, taking in the tension that crackled in the saloon's air. She asked Harriet in a hushed tone what had happened. When the woman responded about Rourke's gang, Lucy's eyes widened in alarm. The travelers by now had regained enough composure to describe the horror. Banks ransacked, bodies left in the street, lawmen executed in public. the outlaws mocking anyone who pleaded for mercy. Their cruelty seemed designed more to spread fear than to gather wealth. Sheriff Dunbar reappeared moments later, drawn by the horses outside. He gleaned the gist of the situation in seconds. "All right," he said, scanning Harriet, Morgan, Dr. Faraday, and the two travelers. "Mesquite Crossing doesn't have the resources to stand against a gang like that in open combat. Our best chance is to keep people inside, board up if necessary. We might send a rider to the next county for reinforcement, but that's a 3-day turnaround at least." Morgan quietly dried his hands on a towel behind the bar. "They'll be here sooner than that if Maple Bluff is any indication." Harriet knew exactly what Morgan implied. By the time help arrived, the damage might be done. She also noticed how still Morgan's right hand had become, less a bartender's casual limb, more a watchful predator's appendage. Dunbar pounded a fist on the bar top. "I'm going to do what I can. I'll gather a few volunteers to keep watch from the rooftops and around the edge of town. If these outlaws come, we'll at least see them before they arrive." Harriet had already stepped around to Dr. Faraday. "Doc, I want you to set up your medical bag where it's most accessible. Lord knows we hope we won't need it, but I'm not fool enough to think we'll get through this unscratched if those men ride in shooting." Morgan finished with the last bottle and moved from behind the bar, standing near the travelers. He flicked his gaze to Harriet. "We can't let them find all the businesses closed," he said in a low, deliberate voice. "That might be more suspicious. The Golden Spur—" "Are you suggesting we stay open?" Harriet interrupted, incredulous. "Morgan, that's practically inviting them in for a drink." Morgan gave the faintest shrug. "Better they walk in here believing it's a normal night, rather than suspect we're braced. A cornered pack hunts more viciously." Dunbar looked torn. "He might have a point, Harriet. If we barricade this place too soon, Rourke's gang might burn it to the ground without warning." The tension among them thickened. Lucy hovered by her small performance area, uncertain if she should start her nightly routine or store her stage costume. Archie Lawson stayed put, nursing a single glass of whiskey, which was typical for him. He might sip one drink for hours, but he never truly left until Harriet or Morgan gently escorted him out at closing. "Fine," Harriet said at last, scowling. "We'll keep the doors unlocked for now, but I'm not telling folks they should stay if they're too frightened. Customers who want to leave, leave. Anyone who wants to stay can do so." She glanced around. A silent understanding passed from Morgan to Harriet, to Dunbar and Dr. Faraday, as though they all realized that Mesquite Crossing was on borrowed time. Their hearts pounded with unspoken dread, but outwardly they tried to maintain a facade of ordinary routine. Harriet checking receipts, Lucy warming her voice, Morgan reciting in his head where every bottle and every hidden weapon was located. Before Dunbar headed back out to coordinate watchmen, Morgan said, "If they do come, there's no place safer in town than these walls." Harriet frowned at him, but she could not deny the certainty in his low voice. And Dr. Faraday, who knew more of Morgan's hidden self than the rest, simply gave the bartender a long, measured look, as if to say, "Yes, I know who you really are." Night descended on Mesquite Crossing with an unseasonal chill, courtesy of the wind howling through the narrow pass west of town. Despite Harriet's stated intention of normalcy, few patrons ventured into the Golden Spur once they heard the rumors of Rourke's impending arrival. By 8 p.m., Lucy Delgado was singing to a half-empty room, her voice beautifully forlorn. Archie sat in his corner, murmuring to himself. Dr. Faraday took a seat at a small table near the front door, medical bag at his feet, ready for the worst. Harriet kept the whiskey bottle within easy reach. Morgan, for his part, appeared more or less the same, though Harriet sensed a different kind of energy radiating from him. Even Lucy, during a lull in her performance, gave Morgan an inquisitive side-eye, as if she, too, sensed the shift. Just as Harriet considered closing early, the saloon doors squeaked open. Sheriff Dunbar entered first, along with a wiry young ranch hand named Pete Thompson, who served as a volunteer lookout. Pete was wide-eyed. "We've got 3 riders out on the east approach," he announced. "Dunbar told me to come back here while he circled around." Morgan's polished movements halted for just a fraction of a moment. "Just 3? That's all I saw," Pete confirmed. "But it could be more in the dark." "What did they look like?" Harriet asked. "Hard to say. One seemed tall and wore a black duster. Another was big through the shoulders. I didn't see the third clearly. Lucy nearly dropped her coffee mug. Tall in a black duster. That might be Rourke. Her voice shook slightly, but she glanced at Morgan. What do we do now? Morgan set down his rag and quietly lifted a finger, signaling for quiet. The tension in the saloon rose until everyone seemed to hold their breath. At that instant they heard it, the deliberate hoofbeats of multiple horses, still far enough away that only the vigilant would notice. But there was something ominous in that steady rhythm, like a war drum echoing in the night. Harriet tensed. She was no stranger to rowdy cowboys, but Rourke's reputation went beyond rowdiness. It screamed cruelty for cruelty's sake. The hoofbeats stopped. In the hush, Morgan's gaze strayed to Harriet, then to Dr. Faraday. Doc, Morgan said, be ready. The doctor said nothing, simply put down his book and opened his bag on the table. Harriet forced her posture to remain firm, ignoring the trembling inside her chest. Lucy went silent, edging off the small performance platform. Even Archie, typically dozing, seemed awake from his half-slumber, sensing danger in the air. Then came the jangle of spurs. The door flew open with a dramatic bang, and 3 men strode in, flanked by swirling dust from the street. Leading them was Red Rourke, named for his fiery hair, but infamous for his pitiless eyes. Behind him ambled Lansing, tall with a crooked grin that almost looked like a sneer. The third man was younger, though the barely contained wildness in his eyes made Harriet think of a cornered beast. This had to be Robbie Quinn. The other 2, the Wilkes twins, were nowhere to be seen, which made Harriet's stomach clench. They might be outside waiting for trouble, or somewhere else entirely, up to no good. Well, well, Rourke said, stepping into the center of the saloon. Ain't this a quaint little watering hole? Surprised you're open when your neighbors shut their doors. He looked around with a predatory grin, eyes landing on Harriet. You the owner? She stood behind a bar stool, deciding to speak boldly. I am. Harriet Cole. This here is Morgan Gray, my partner in the place. Welcome, I suppose. I trot farm. Rourke's grin stretched. He spread his hands as if to say, I come in peace. Nice to make your acquaintance, Miss Cole. We're just travelers, come from Maple Bluff. His tone dripped with mockery. But we found that place lacking in hospitality. Morgan stepped forward, subtly placing himself between Harriet and the outlaws. What can we get you, gentlemen? He asked, as if they were ordinary patrons. Rourke's gaze snapped to him, clearly unprepared for the calm that radiated from this quiet bartender. Robbie Quinn let out an obnoxious laugh. Lansing sized Morgan up with a narrow stare. Call us gentlemen again, Red, Lansing said, addressing Rourke by his nickname. And maybe we'll show this barkeep just how genteel we can be. He tapped the butt of his pistol for emphasis. Morgan was unruffled. We serve all who pay their tab, he answered softly. Tell me what you'll have. Rourke studied Morgan with a faint smirk. Top shelf whiskey if you've got it, the kind that's too good for most dusty towns. Morgan gave a short nod and retrieved a bottle from the highest shelf. He set down 3 glasses. His calmness seemed to rankle Robbie Quinn, who was itching to demonstrate his skill. You're a quiet one, Quinn said. Don't you know who stands before you, barkeep? Morgan's gaze flicked to Harriet, then back to Quinn. You're the men from Maple Bluff, he replied evenly, though Harriet noticed his posture shift ever so slightly. Word travels fast. Not enough, Lansing sneered. He reached out, grabbed Harriet's ledger off the bar, and tossed it aside. I'm feeling parched. Hurry it up. Morgan poured whiskey into 3 glasses, never once losing that measured calm. Rourke raised a toast, then knocked back half of his drink in a gulp, grimacing theatrically. You see, we had a little disagreement in Maple Bluff. The sheriff there seemed to think we weren't welcome. He raised his eyebrows in feigned innocence. He ended up with a bullet between the eyes. Maybe he should have offered us a drink first. Quinn let out another harsh laugh. Harriet's stomach turned at the casual way they mentioned murder, as if it were a card game they had bested. Archie Lawson in the corner coughed conspicuously, but otherwise kept his head low. Lucy had inched toward Harriet, evidently wanting to stand in solidarity without drawing attention. Rourke set his half-empty glass on the bar with a clink. Now, Ms. Cole, he said, giving Harriet a too wide smile, I trust your hospitality extends to rooms. My men and I could use a night's rest before we move on. Harriet forced herself to remain steady. We have 2 rooms upstairs for travelers. They're small, but you're welcome to them for a fee. Rourke chuckled. Money's no problem. We'll take both. Although, seeing as we have more men in our group, he paused for emphasis, letting Harriet and Morgan absorb the implication that the Wilkes twins were out there somewhere. We might need to rearrange. It'd be a shame if we had to crowd your other paying customers out. Morgan responded, we can make arrangements, in a voice so neutral it nearly sounded bored. Harriet couldn't help but wonder if that placid tone was exactly what kept the men from turning violent right away. Dr. Faraday, ever watchful from his table, hovered a hand near his medical bag, prepared for any sudden outbreak of gunfire. Quinn finished his glass and promptly slammed it on the bar. This is too sweet, he declared, pulling his revolver with a flourish. Man drinks whiskey for the burn, not the taste. To prove his point, he spun the pistol around his trigger finger once. You want to see a trick, barkeep? Morgan's stance shifted again. A subtle weight transfer Harriet knew meant danger. Before Quinn could complete his second spin, Morgan spoke. Careful, he said. A man can shoot himself spinning iron like that. Quinn's eyes narrowed. And what do you know about guns, bartender? You hide behind that apron all day? His expression was ugly, like he'd rip off Morgan's head at the slightest hint of provocation. Rourke observed from the corner of his eye, gauging Morgan's reaction. Harriet realized the entire saloon was one wrong word away from a bloodbath. Morgan's calm never wavered. Seen too many men try fancy moves. Many ended up dead because they valued show over skill. His voice was so low Harriet barely caught it, but Quinn heard it loud and clear. A tension-laden silence followed. Then abruptly, Rourke broke into a grin. Well said, barkeep. But me, I prefer men with a bit of style, he said, glancing at Quinn. And you talk like you've seen your share of shootouts. Behind the bar, Harriet's mind whirled. These outlaws were not the typical rowdy travelers Morgan often calmed with a subtle word. These men seemed to relish cruelty, and the polite mask they wore was guaranteed to slip. She also noticed Dr. Faraday's attention fixed on Morgan, concern etched into the doctor's face. Meanwhile, Lansing stepped away from the bar, scanning the saloon interior. The walls decorated with dusty pictures, Lucy's small stage, the back corridor. Harriet guessed he was picturing angles, places to shoot from, or spots to corner a person who tried to run. At that moment, the saloon doors swung open again with force. In strode a figure. Deputy Will Briggs, out of breath and eyes frantic. Dunbar's second in command always seemed young and green, but tonight he wore desperation like a cloak. Morgan! Harriet! He blurted, ignoring the presence of Rourke's men at first. Sheriff Dunbar's been shot. He's alive, but... He froze as he finally registered Rourke, Lansing, and Quinn. Rourke gave a mocking smile. Sheriff's been shot, you say? Tsk, tsk. You folks sure have trouble with your lawmen in these parts. Deputy Briggs swallowed hard, hand inching toward his revolver. Lansing's own hand hovered above his pistol, grin turning feral. Morgan took a single step forward, trying to redirect the tension. Where is Dunbar now? He asked calmly. Near the livery, Briggs replied, voice thick. He and a lookout walked up on 2 men rummaging for supplies. Shots were fired. I think those men were part of this gang. Dunbar took a slug in the chest. He's losing blood. A flicker of worry passed through Harriet. She glanced at Dr. Faraday, who was already on his feet. But no one moved just yet, because Lansing's face lit with cruel mischief. Only a matter of time before your sheriff bleeds out, Lansing said, eyes trained on Briggs. Don't you want to run and help him, deputy? I do, Briggs shot back, though he trembled at Lansing's provocation. Rourke cleared his throat, capturing the deputy's attention. Boy, Rourke drawled, you go out that door, you'll have to pass at least 2 more of my men. Might not be the best move, unless you want to end up like your sheriff. Morgan's voice cut through the tension. Let the doctor through, he said, looking at Rourke. You can see he's unarmed. Let him tend Dunbar. Rourke arched an eyebrow. On one condition, barkeep. None of you tries to play hero. We're big believers in making examples of heroes. Silence loomed. Harriet's heart pounded. Dr. Faraday, mustering courage, straightened his coat. I can help the sheriff if I'm allowed to leave. he said. Rourke made a lazy, dismissive wave. Go, Doc. But if you come back with a posse, you'll find nothing left of this place but ashes. Harriet's throat was tight. Still, she forced herself to nod encouragement to Dr. Faraday, who hurried out, followed by Deputy Briggs. Quinn traced their exit with his gun. That's a shame, he muttered. I was hoping to see more heroics. Morgan exhaled quietly. He locked eyes with Harriet. This is it, that look seemed to say. They were on the brink. Time stretched agonizingly as the outlaws remained. Lucy stopped singing altogether. Archie Lawson sat still as stone, not daring to speak. Harriet put on a stoic expression, though inside her nerves were jangling. She noticed Morgan's posture, upright, shoulders slightly back, right hand relaxed but poised. It was reminiscent of men she'd seen in old dime novel illustrations, the legendary gunslingers known for lightning reflexes. Except Morgan had always been the last person to draw attention to himself. What was the truth behind him? Rourke and Lansing carried on a murmured discussion while Quinn paced near the bar, gun loose in his hand. Once in a while, Quinn would shoot Morgan a challenging glare, but the bartender's calm seemed unbreakable. Then Lansing turned abruptly. So, Harriet Cole, he said, glancing at her ledger, you keep track of all the money that passes through here? She swallowed. That's right. He picked up one of the bar stools, turned it so he could sit with a leg braced outward, and faced Harriet. I'm real curious how much money you've got on hand. Robbing local banks doesn't net as much as folks think. A saloon, though, well, there's always a trickle of coin, isn't there? Harriet felt a chill at how casual Lansing was about it. Tonight's been slow, she replied, keeping her voice steady. You can see for yourself. She gestured at the coin box behind her. Rourke chimed in. Slow or not, we'll take every penny. Consider it a rent payment for occupying your fine establishment. Lucy gave a sharp intake of breath, stepping closer to Harriet. I wouldn't push them. Morgan's voice resonated, the quiet warning carried in each syllable. They're not men who like to haggle. Rourke turned, fixating on Morgan with renewed interest. Speaking of you, barkeep, Morgan Gray, was it? Morgan dipped his head slightly. That's right, Asheri. Rourke rolled the name around in his mind. Doesn't ring any bells. And yet, you act like a man who's either too naive to be scared or too deadly to be humble. Harriet's eyes flickered to Morgan. A secret corner of her heart had long suspected there was more to Morgan's story than he'd admitted. The rumor mill in Mesquite Crossing had offered a half-dozen theories. That he'd once been a Pinkerton detective, or a soldier who deserted, or a farmhand fleeing a shady past. Harriet had never tried to pry it from him, and Morgan never volunteered to clarify. But that intangible tension in his stance reminded her of someone who once wore a holster for a living. Morgan set his jaw. I learned never to show fear, that's all. Fear invites a bullet. Quinn snorted. Ha! Why don't you show me if you can draw that piece hidden under your apron? He reached forward, trying to yank up the edge of Morgan's apron, clearly expecting to see a revolver holster. But Morgan stepped back smoothly. Careful, Morgan repeated, a lethal softness dripping from the word. Lansing rose. He brushed Quinn aside and leaned into Morgan. Let's see it. Or are you unarmed? His grin spoke of wanting to provoke a violent reaction. Rourke, however, held up a restraining hand, eyes never leaving Morgan. Wait. Let's not ruin the fun just yet. We'll deal with our financial arrangement first. He jerked his chin at Harriet. Open that coin box. Harriet complied, hating the feeling of handing over the night's meager earnings. She spilled coins into a small burlap sack Lansing tossed her. Lansing eyed each coin like it was a personal triumph, while Quinn hovered, probably hoping Harriet would refuse, so he'd have an excuse to gun her down. Just when it seemed the outlaws were distracted by the coins, the Golden Spurs doors flung wide once more. This time the men who entered were the other half of Rourke's circle, the Wilkes twins, nearly identical in their lanky frames, and shared sneers. They didn't bother with pleasantries. The twins parted to reveal Dr. Faraday, who was being prodded along at gunpoint. Behind them, two more local ranch hands cowered, arms raised. The twins must have ambushed the doctor and whoever else was near the livery. Rourke turned to face them with a grin. Got yourself a captive audience, Doc? Dr. Faraday's usually composed face was tight with anger. Sheriff Dunbar won't survive without proper care. He needs to be moved to my office. One of the Wilkes twins, Harriet couldn't tell them apart, gave a theatrical shrug. Might let you do that. But then again, we might prefer seeing how many bodies we can stack before morning. Harriet's fists clenched, but she said nothing. Lucy pressed a hand to her mouth in horror. Archie Lawson inched further into his seat, as if trying to vanish. Morgan, though, stepped closer to Dr. Faraday, placing himself between the doctor and the outlaws. The Wilkes twins watched him with hawk-like intensity. "That man's life is in your hands," Morgan said calmly, addressing Rourke. "If you let the doc go, Dunbar might yet live." Rourke's lips parted in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Why should I care if your sheriff dies or not? We're not exactly friendly with lawmen." Harriet's adrenaline spiked, but Morgan continued with eerie composure. "Because if the sheriff dies, you'll have turned this into a full-scale manhunt. Word will spread to every lawman in the territory. You'll have nowhere to run." Lansing barked a laugh. "We're used to running. We don't have to worry about some bunch of star-badged hillbillies." "No," Morgan acknowledged. "You probably aren't. But maybe you care about the time it'll cost. The bigger the hunt, the less chance you have of escaping with your stolen money." A flicker of indecision crossed Rourke's face. Harriet saw it, the predicament of a ruthless outlaw who didn't relish more complications. After a moment, Rourke shrugged and waved a hand. "Fine. Let the doc do his job. But Quinn goes with him as a chaperone." Dr. Faraday's spine straightened. "I won't have an armed thug in my operating space." Rourke's smile turned dangerous. "Too bad. Accept the deal or watch your sheriff bleed out." Harriet expected Morgan to protest, but he merely gave Dr. Faraday a small nod. "Go," he said. "Do what you can." Dr. Faraday pressed his lips together, grabbed his bag, and turned. Quinn motioned with his revolver for the doctor to move, then followed him out the door, leaving the Wilkes twins behind. Lucy exhaled shakily. "They're dividing themselves," she whispered to Harriet. Her words meant only for Harriet's ears. Harriet, though, couldn't decide if that was good or bad. Rourke turned back to Harriet. "Now about those rooms upstairs," he said, his voice carrying that mocking lilt again. "The twins can take one. Lansing and I will take the other. Of course, if this saloon is as quiet as it looks, we might just bed down right here in the main room. Keep an eye on you all." Morgan stepped in smoothly. "No need. I'll show you the rooms. Harriet, you want to wrap up business for the evening?" Rourke's suspicious eyes lingered on Morgan. "That's how it is, barkeep. You plan to show me to my bed? Read me a bedtime story?" Harriet tensed, but Morgan simply said, "If that's what you want, I'm at your service." They moved as a tense group toward the staircase at the back of the saloon. Harriet hung back, exchanging glances with Lucy, who in turn was wringing her hands. The Wilkes twins followed Rourke and Lansing up the narrow stairs, guns not quite raised but certainly not put away. Morgan led them silently. Harriet considered calling out a warning to him, but her voice faltered under the intense hush. Even Archie Lawson stirred uneasily in his seat, old bones sensing the danger in the air. At the top of the stairs, Harriet could barely see them in the lantern light. Morgan gestured to two doors on the left side of the hall. "This one's modest but has two bunks," he said, indicating the closer door. "The other has a single bed." Rourke tested the nearest doorknob. "Lansing, you and one of the twins can take this one." He nodded to the second door. "I'll be in there. The other twin can keep watch in the hallway." A sudden tension flared as Lansing stared Morgan down. "Barkeep, you wouldn't happen to be planning on any midnight heroics, would you? Like sneaking up on us?" Morgan's voice remained smooth. "I'm just a man who pours drinks. I've made it 5 years in Mesquite Crossing without turning violent. I see no reason to start tonight." Rourke's lips curled. "You talk like a man who's got regrets, barkeep. Or maybe a man who's seen enough bloodshed." Morgan gave a slight shrug. "Either way, no one gains if we start shooting." That made Lansing laugh, a short barking sound. "This is the weirdest welcome wagon I've seen. We bust in, threaten you, kill or injure a lawman, and you're still trying to keep the peace?" Morgan said nothing. He took a step back down the hallway, giving them space. The Wilkes twins surveyed the doors, apparently satisfied there was no trick waiting inside. "We'll be out here," one twin muttered. "Can see the stairs from here." "Him." Rourke turned the knob of his chosen room, glanced inside, then gave Morgan a final smirk. "Good night, barkeep. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Or me." He laughed at his own joke and disappeared behind the door. Lansing and one Wilkes twin took the second room, shutting it with a slam. The other Wilkes twin leaned on the wall in the hall, gun in hand. Morgan retreated downstairs, returning to the main floor. Harriet, Lucy, and Archie were there, along with the second ranch hand captured by the twins. Harriet exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Are they settled?" she asked in a half-whisper. Morgan nodded. "For now, they think they have the upper hand. They're just resting until Quinn and Dr. Faraday come back, or until they decide to cause more trouble." Harriet grabbed Morgan's arm. "We need to do something. They won't just leave quietly. You saw them, Morgan. These are men who enjoy terror." He gave her a measured glance. "Yes," he said, voice soft. "I know their type, but we have to pick our moment." "Your moment for what?" Lucy asked. Her voice trembled, though her curiosity burned. "Since when do you know how to handle men like that?" Morgan hesitated, then let out a slow breath. He regarded Lucy with a seriousness that made Harriet's heart flutter with anxiety. "I've been in dangerous saloons before," he said carefully. "I learned to see men's weaknesses, the way they draw, the way they threaten." Archie stood, hobbling over. "I always suspected there was more to you, Morgan Gray," he said in a gravelly voice. "Don't think I never noticed how you keep that right hand free." Harriet's gaze flicked from Archie back to Morgan. "Where do we stand?" she asked, tone urgent. "We've got a handful of dangerous men upstairs, Quinn out there harassing the doc, and Dunbar clinging to life. Meanwhile, the twins put fear in half the town. Do we wait until morning?" Morgan closed his eyes briefly, as though calling up courage from some hidden well. When he opened them, Harriet saw a flicker of sadness behind the calm. "We need to buy time for Dr. Faraday to save Dunbar," he said. "If Dunbar dies, Rourke's gang might just blow everything to pieces and ride out." Lucy covered her mouth. "And if Dunbar lives?" Morgan's lips tightened. "Then they face actual justice. And maybe this ends without more bloodshed. But if we want that chance, we stay quiet for now." The hours that followed were some of the longest Harriet Cole had ever endured. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind, every drip of leftover rain from the saloon's eaves made her flinch. She and Lucy cleaned up scattered glasses and tried to close the Golden Spur in as normal a fashion as possible without disturbing the men upstairs. Archie Lawson eventually curled up on a bench, dozing fitfully, unwilling to leave the relative safety of the saloon. The captured ranch hand lingered near the bar, eyes darting at every noise. Morgan, as usual, busied himself restocking or wiping surfaces, but Harriet sensed it was mostly to occupy his mind. A little past midnight, the doors opened again, and Quinn stepped inside, accompanied by Dr. Faraday. They both looked drained, Quinn in an agitated, sweaty way, the doc in a deeply weary manner. Harriet rushed up to them. "How's Dunbar?" Dr. Faraday rubbed his eyes. "He's hanging on by a thread, Harriet. I've done all I can with the tools I had in my office. He needs rest, but if he makes it till daybreak, he might pull through." Harriet felt relief and anxiety in the same breath. "That's better than we feared, Doc. Thank you." Quinn rolled his shoulders as if warding off tension. "I'm ready to hole up with the boys. Which room do they have?" He looked around. "Where's Rourke?" Morgan gestured toward the stairs. "He's got the second door on the left." "Osherm." Quinn narrowed his eyes. "I'm guessing they left you alive for a reason," he said, voice dripping contempt. "I'd have thought you'd be on your knees, begging them not to blow your head off." Morgan offered a small shrug. "We prefer to run a peaceful saloon." The younger outlaw stared at Morgan, clearly trying to detect sarcasm. Harriet could almost see the fury building in Quinn's stance. He hated that Morgan refused to give him the satisfaction of cowering. "Peaceful, huh?" Quinn repeated. He edged toward Morgan. "You think I'm not wise to your game? All this calm, careful talk. People like you snap the hardest. I've seen it." Harriet stepped between them, playing at hostess again. "Your friends have your room. Don't let me keep you from your beauty sleep, Mr. Quinn." Quinn spat on the floor, but then heaved a sigh and trudged upstairs. Dr. Faraday lingered near Harriet and Morgan, keeping his voice low. Dunbar is stable, but I can't promise anything. Robbie Quinn hovered over me every second. At least they let me do my work. Morgan nodded. Thank you, Doc, for risking your life. The doctor's gaze flicked upward, toward the men on the second floor. I'll stay here tonight. Keep an eye on them. And on you, Morgan. We've come too far to lose the town now. The doc's words carried a double meaning that Harriet didn't miss. He was referencing something older, some oath or promise that Morgan carried. Morgan gave a faint, grateful nod. Harriet felt a swirl of contradictory emotions. Relief that Dunbar might live, dread at the precarious truce they were in, and a pulse of curiosity about Morgan's secret. By 1 in the morning, the saloon was as quiet as it could be, with dangerous men sleeping, or feigning sleep, overhead. Harriet locked the front door, then turned down the lamps so the main floor lay in deep shadows. Morgan hunkered behind the bar, Dr. Faraday took a seat near the staircase, and Lucy tried to rest on a bench. Harriet half expected a gunshot to ring out at any moment, but dawn arrived with only a few muffled noises from upstairs. Footsteps, a cough, an occasional grunt. The moment Harriet saw the first golden rays slip through the eastern window, she hurried to the dock. Should we check on Dunbar? He must be alone now. Yes, Dr. Faraday said. I'd like to see if he made it through the night. Morgan pushed to his feet. I'll go with you. They made their way outside, emerging into a town on edge. Windows were still shuttered. Hardly anyone moved about the dusty main street. The livery was deserted, the stable hand apparently too frightened to return. When they reached Dr. Faraday's office, Harriet's heart clenched at the sight of Dunbar propped up against pillows. Ashen face but breathing. A faint line of color hinted he still had fight left in him. By the final sunrise, Mesquite Crossing stands stronger than ever. The fight against Rourke's gang taught everyone the power of unity, and even the deadliest foes can be disarmed by the right person with the right resolve. Morgan Gray, once just a silent bartender, emerges as a beacon of quiet strength and compassion, reminding us that true heroes don't always boast or rage. Sometimes they simply serve kindness and step up when it matters most. No matter the scars left behind, the townspeople refuse to let darkness define them. They look out for one another with new vigilance, and Morgan, having reconciled a turbulent past, continues his work with a renewed sense of purpose. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What moved you most in this story? Did any moment truly catch you by surprise? Share your opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation alive.